Marcus Doyle, Fiona O'Reilly, and Omar Hussain. 3 names whispered in fear across London, Liverpool and Birmingham. They weren't just street criminals, they were ruthless masterminds who built empires rivaling the deadliest cartels of South America. Their ambition was limitless, their brutality unmatched, and their shadows stretched deep into the heart of Britain's underworld. This is the untold story of how these British narcos rose to power and the violent downfall that changed everything. In the heart of South London, Marcus Doyle's story began far from the glamour and power he would one day command. Growing up in a rundown estate plagued by poverty and violence, Marcus quickly learned that survival meant being smarter and tougher than those around him. As a teenager, he was drawn into the local drug scene, starting with small deals on street corners. But unlike many who lost themselves to the chaos, Marcus saw an opportunity, a chance to build something much bigger. His rise was not fueled by brute force alone. Marcus was a strategist, a planner who understood that power came from control and secrecy. Instead of flashy displays of violence, he built a network with careful precision, recruiting loyal lieutenants who answered only to him. He moved beyond the estates, infiltrating legitimate businesses to launder money and conceal his growing empire. Car washes, nightclubs, even real estate ventures, all became part of a complex web designed to mask the true source of his wealth. By his early 30s, Marcus controlled a vast distribution network supplying drugs across London. His operation rivaled the cartels in Colombia and Mexico in both scale and ruthlessness. But Marcus's greatest weapon was his ability to stay in the shadows. Police investigations came and went with no solid evidence linking him to the violence and trafficking that devastated neighborhoods. His name was whispered only in fear, never openly spoken. Yet beneath this carefully maintained facade, cracks began to show. Ambition drove Marcus to expand further, pushing into territories controlled by older gangs who viewed him as an upstart. This sparked a wave of violent clashes, kidnappings, and mysterious disappearances that unsettled the fragile balance of London's underworld. Marcus responded with cold efficiency, eliminating threats quietly but without hesitation. Despite his brutal reputation, Marcus was not without a code. He avoided unnecessary bloodshed and protected those who remained loyal. His vision was clear: to build an empire that would endure beyond fleeting power struggles, one that could rival the great cartels, but adapt to the British streets. As law enforcement intensified their efforts to dismantle his network, Marcus stayed several steps ahead, always changing tactics, always staying hidden. His story is one of ambition and cold calculation, a dark mirror reflecting the brutal world of the South American narcos, but played out on the streets of London. In the gritty docks of Liverpool, Fiona O'Reilly carved her own ruthless path to power, defying every expectation placed on her. Born into a working-class family, Fiona's early life was shaped by hardship and resilience. While most saw her as quiet and unassuming, beneath the surface burned a fierce determination to seize control of the city's lucrative drug trade. From a young age, she understood that survival in Liverpool's harsh underworld meant being smarter, faster, and more ruthless than everyone else. Unlike many of her male counterparts, Fiona avoided the spotlight and brutal displays of force. Instead, she ruled with icy precision, orchestrating her operations from behind the scenes. Her cartel specialized in smuggling cocaine through Liverpool's busy shipping ports, using the city's vast network of docks as a gateway for drugs flowing into the UK. Fiona's mastery of logistics and her ability to exploit loopholes in customs enforcement made her smuggling ring incredibly efficient and nearly impossible to trace. Her leadership style was calm but commanding. She surrounded herself with loyal lieutenants who executed her plans without question. Fiona's presence was felt everywhere, yet she rarely appeared in public or even within her own warehouses. Her silence was a weapon, one that kept both rivals and law enforcement guessing. Rumors about her grew darker and more exaggerated with every passing year, but no one could prove the truth behind the whispering shadows. Fiona's rise disrupted Liverpool's old guard, who were used to running their operations with blunt force and open violence. Her approach was more calculated, focused on control and expansion rather than reckless confrontation. Yet, when challenged, she showed a capacity for chilling brutality. Several rival gangs found themselves eliminated in a wave of carefully planned attacks that left no clear trail back to her. This earned Fiona both fear and grudging respect across the criminal landscape. Despite her growing empire, Fiona remained vigilant. She understood that her position was fragile, built on silence and deception. The city's law enforcement, increasingly frustrated by the lack of leads, launched covert operations to infiltrate her organization. But Fiona's network was skilled at rooting out informants, leaving the police chasing shadows. In a world dominated by men, Fiona Riley became a queen whose power stretched far beyond Liverpool's docks. A quiet but deadly force that mirrored the ambition and brutality of South America's most feared narcos. In Birmingham's rough neighborhoods, Omar Hussein's rise was as brutal as it was swift. Growing up amidst poverty and gang violence, Omar's early years were shaped by the harsh realities of street life. Abandoned by family and forced to fend for himself, he quickly learned that strength and fearlessness were the only currencies that mattered. What set Omar apart wasn't just his toughness, it was his sharp mind and ruthless ambition. From dealing small amounts of drugs on street corners, he soon understood that survival meant taking bigger risks and playing a larger game. Omar's empire was built on more than just drugs. He controlled an extensive weapons trafficking network that supplied guns to gangs across the city and beyond. His operation bridged the gap between street-level violence and international smuggling routes, making him a feared figure not only in Birmingham, but throughout the UK's criminal underworld. His reputation for sudden, brutal enforcement made even hardened criminals wary. There was no warning, no hesitation, only swift retribution for those who crossed him. Unlike the shadowy tactics used by other bosses, Omar ruled with an iron grip and public displays of power. His presence was known through violent acts that shook neighborhoods, drive-by shootings, targeted assassinations, and explosions that sent clear messages to rivals. This ferocity earned him the nickname the Falcon, a predator watching from above, striking without mercy. Omar's ambition mirrored the most violent South American cartels, but he also understood the British landscape. He exploited the city's central location and its connections to Europe to smuggle cocaine and firearms, making Birmingham a key hub in the UK's drug trade. His network was tightly controlled, with trusted lieutenants enforcing discipline and loyalty through fear. However, Omar's brutal tactics came at a cost. His violent methods attracted intense attention from law enforcement and rival gangs alike. Police raids increased, and a coalition of smaller gangs formed with the goal of challenging his dominance. The streets of Birmingham grew more dangerous as the city teetered on the edge of open gang warfare. Omar's empire, while powerful, was fragile, built on fear and violence that could explode at any moment. Despite the chaos, Omar remained focused on one thing: expanding his control. His vision was clear, shaped by the ruthless narcos he admired abroad. Birmingham was his kingdom, and he was determined to rule it without compromise, no matter the cost. The criminal worlds of London and Liverpool, once separate and fiercely competitive, began to intertwine through an unlikely alliance between Marcus Doyle and Fiona O'Reilly. Both were driven by ambition and a desire to expand their empires beyond their own cities, and they saw an opportunity in combining their strengths. Marcus controlled London's vast drug supply chain, while Fiona's smuggling operation in Liverpool's docks offered an efficient route to distribute the narcotics across the country. Together they could create a network that rivaled even the largest international cartel. This partnership, however, was built on shaky ground. Both Marcus and Fiona were naturally suspicious, having survived by watching their backs and expecting betrayal at any moment. Their alliance was less a friendship and more a strategic truce, each aware that any sign of weakness could be exploited. To maintain control, they relied on a small group of trusted lieutenants who acted as intermediaries, carefully managing communication and operations. This helped keep their relationship professional and distant, avoiding the personal ties that could lead to vulnerability. For a time, the alliance flourished. Shipments flowed smoothly from London to Liverpool, then out through the ports to Europe and beyond. The combined power of the two cartels began to edge out smaller gangs, disrupting the criminal balance across the UK. Law enforcement agencies struggled to keep pace, overwhelmed by the scale and sophistication of the operation. The partnership seemed unstoppable. But cracks soon appeared. A large shipment of cocaine, valued at millions, vanished without a trace while en route between the cities. Suspicion fell quickly, and fingers were pointed within both organizations. Each side feared there was a mole, someone betraying their secrets for personal gain or to sabotage the alliance. The tension that followed was dangerous. Trust between Marcus and Fiona frayed, and the smooth cooperation that had once existed gave way to cautious maneuvering. The missing shipment unleashed a deadly game of cat and mouse. Both bosses ordered investigations within their own ranks, and ruthless punishments followed for those suspected of disloyalty. Rival gangs watched carefully, sensing weakness in the once mighty alliance. The partnership that promised domination was now threatened from within, leaving both London and Liverpool's criminal underworlds on edge and setting the stage for a violent fallout that neither Marcus nor Fiona could fully control. In Birmingham, Omar Hussein's iron grip on the city's criminal underworld was about to be tested like never before. For years, his ruthless rule had kept rivals in check through fear and violence. But beneath the surface, resentment had been growing among smaller gangs and disillusioned members within his own network. These groups saw Omar's harsh tactics as a weakness, a leadership style that alienated allies and made enemies faster than it gained respect. The rebellion began quietly, with whispers of defiance spreading through the city's streets. A coalition of rival gangs, unite by their shared frustration, started challenging Omar's control over drug territories and weapons trafficking routes. These smaller groups, once fragmented and weak, now found strength in numbers and a common goal: to overthrow Omar and claim their own piece of Birmingham's lucrative criminal economy. Violence escalated rapidly. The city became a battleground, with brazen attacks and ambushes targeting Omar's lieutenants and shipments. Explosions rocked neighborhoods, and innocent bystanders were caught in the crossfire. The public became increasingly alarmed, forcing law enforcement to respond with heightened raids and patrols. But the police presence only added fuel to the fire, intensifying the chaos rather than calming it. Omar responded with brutal efficiency. He ordered retaliations that were swift and merciless, targeting anyone suspected of aiding the rebellion. Kidnappings and public executions sent clear messages. Betrayal would not be tolerated. His enforcement teams operated with military precision, striking fear into the hearts of enemies and allies alike. Yet this violent crackdown also exposed vulnerabilities. The open warfare attracted unwanted attention, threatening to bring down Omar's entire operation under police scrutiny. As the rebellion gained momentum, fractures appeared within Omar's own ranks. Some lieutenants questioned the sustainability of endless violence, fearing it would lead to the collapse of their empire. Others remained fiercely loyal, willing to fight to the death to protect their leader. This internal division added another layer of complexity to an already volatile situation. The rebellion in Birmingham was more than just a power struggle, it was a turning point. Omar's iron grip was slipping, and the city's underworld stood on the brink of transformation. The brutal conflict would determine who controlled Birmingham's streets and whether Omar's vision of domination could survive the mounting pressure from both enemies and law enforcement alike. In the shadowy streets of Liverpool, a determined undercover detective began to close in on Fiona Riley's elusive drug cartel. For months, the detective had worked tirelessly, piecing together fragments of information from informants, surveillance, and intercepted communications. Fiona's network was notoriously secretive, but cracks in the operation slowly emerged under the pressure of law enforcement's growing focus. The detective understood that taking down Fiona wouldn't be a quick or easy victory. It would require patience, caution. The detective infiltrated deeper into the cartel's inner circles. Every step forward was met with heightened risk, as the organization was known for rooting out traitors and informants with brutal efficiency. One wrong move could mean exposure and a swift, often deadly, punishment. Despite the dangers, the detective pressed on, driven by a sense of duty and the hope of dismantling a criminal empire that had long operated in the shadows. As the investigation progressed, the detective uncovered key details about the cartel's smuggling routes, money laundering operations, and violent enforcement tactics. Fiona's control over the docks allowed her to move vast quantities of cocaine into the UK, while complex financial schemes hid the origins of the profits. These discoveries painted a picture of a sophisticated criminal machine that reached far beyond Liverpool's borders. Yet the closer the detective got, the more isolated and vulnerable they became. Maintaining their cover required living a double life, constantly balancing the risk of exposure against the need to gather evidence. The pressure weighed heavily, and moments of doubt crept in. Every interaction could be a trap, every ally potentially a betrayer. Tensions escalated when the detective's presence nearly came to light during a surprise raid on one of Fiona's warehouses. Quick thinking and a narrow escape prevented disaster, but the close call sent shockwaves through the investigation. From that point on, the detective knew the clock was ticking. Fiona's network was tightening its grip and betrayal could come from anywhere. The pursuit of Fiona O'Reilly became a high-stakes game of shadows and deception. The detective's quest to expose her cartel highlighted not only the dangers faced by law enforcement, but also the resilience of a criminal empire built on silence and fear. As the operation reached a critical point, the fate of Liverpool's underworld and the detective's own survival hung in the balance. Marcus Doyle's carefully constructed empire in London began to unravel from within, when betrayal struck at the heart of his operation. For years Marcus had built his network on loyalty and secrecy, surrounding himself with trusted lieutenants who carried out his orders without question. But even the most tightly controlled organizations are vulnerable to ambition and greed, and one of Marcus's closest allies proved to be his undoing. The betrayal came as a shock. A trusted lieutenant secretly fed information to a rival gang, eager to claim a piece of Marcus's vast drug empire. The leak exposed key details about shipments, safe houses, and financial operations, giving Marcus's enemies the advantage they needed to launch a coordinated assault. The attacks were swift and brutal, marked by violent raids, kidnappings, and unexplained disappearances that left the underworld shaken. Marcus's response was ruthless, but calculated. Instead of reacting with blind rage, he launched an internal purge, targeting anyone suspected of disloyalty or involvement in the betrayal. This internal war was fought in the shadows, with disappearances and sudden deaths serving as grim warnings to others. The paranoia that spread through the organization was as dangerous as the external threats, threatening to tear the network apart from the inside. The betrayal also exposed Marcus's vulnerability in the eyes of other crime bosses. Rivals who had long watched his rise with envy seized the opportunity to challenge his dominance. The power struggles escalated, leading to violent clashes across London's criminal landscape. Neighborhoods once under Marcus's control became battlegrounds, with innocent lives caught in the crossfire. Despite the chaos, Marcus remained determined to hold on to his empire. He tightened his security, changed his methods, and doubled down on secrecy. But the damage had been done. Trust within his organization was fractured, and the fear that once kept his lieutenants obedient was replaced by suspicion and uncertainty. The betrayal marked a turning point in Marcus Doyle's reign. What began as a secret leak spiraled into a war that threatened to destroy the empire he had spent years building. In the shadows of London's underworld, loyalty became a rare commodity, and the fight for survival grew more desperate with each passing day. The kingpin was no longer untouchable, and the consequences of betrayal would echo far beyond the city streets. In a remote location outside Birmingham, the three most powerful crime bosses in the UK, Marcus Doyle from London, Fiona O'Reilly from Liverpool, and Omar Hossain from Birmingham, gathered for a secret meeting that could reshape the country's criminal landscape. The summit was meant to be a moment of fragile peace, a chance to negotiate territories and avoid the costly gang wars that had begun to threaten their empires. Each came with their own demands and grudges, aware that the balance of power was shifting and that cooperation might be their only way to survive. The meeting was tense from the start. Years of rivalry, betrayals, and suspicion hung heavy in the air. The bosses sat in silence for long stretches, calculating their next moves, weighing risks, and measuring each other's strength. The discussions were cautious, with offers of truce and proposals for shared control of key territories. Beneath the surface, each boss looked for weaknesses, searching for opportunities to gain the upper hand. As negotiations dragged on, the atmosphere grew increasingly volatile. Old grudges surfaced, and the slightest misstep threatened to ignite violence. Then, in a sudden and shocking turn, an assassination attempt shook the gathering. A carefully planted bomb exploded nearby, sending chaos through the meeting. Though no one was killed, the attack shattered any remaining trust between the bosses. In the immediate aftermath, accusations flew. Each leader suspected the others of orchestrating the attack, or perhaps a rival gang attempting to destabilize their alliance. The fragile peace evaporated, replaced by anger and fear. Security tightened, but the damage was done. What was meant to be a summit for cooperation had become a trigger for open conflict. The assassination attempt ignited a chain reaction across London, Liverpool, and Birmingham. Rival gangs, sensing the chaos, moved aggressively to exploit the disorder. Streets turned into battlegrounds, with brutal violence escalating as old alliances fractured and new ones formed. The once secretive underworld erupted into open war. This summit, meant to bring order and stability, instead plunged the British Narcos into their darkest hour. The fallout was devastating, not just for the crime bosses, but for the cities caught in the crossfire. As violence spread and law enforcement stepped up their efforts, the underworld faced a reckoning that would change everything, setting the stage for the collapse of the empires they had spent years building. The collapse of the British Narcos empires came swiftly and violently, a dramatic fall from power that shocked the criminal underworld and law enforcement alike. Marcus Doyle, once the untouchable kingpin of London, was finally caught in a meticulously planned sting operation. After years of staying ahead of the police, Marcus's downfall was triggered by the betrayals within his own ranks, and the intensified surveillance that followed. His arrest sent shockwaves through London's drug scene, creating a power vacuum that rival gangs rushed to fill. But without his strategic control, chaos exploded in the streets, with violence spiraling out of control. In Liverpool, Fiona O'Reilly narrowly escaped a massive police raid that targeted her smuggling warehouses and front businesses. The site slipping through the authorities' grasp, Fiona lost critical parts of her operation, including key lieutenants and shipment routes. The blow weakened her cartel's grip on the docks, forcing her to retreat and regroup. Rival factions seized the opportunity to encroach on her territory, igniting fierce battles for control. Fiona's empire, once a quiet but powerful force, was now fractured and vulnerable. Meanwhile, Birmingham streets burned as Omar Hussein's rebellion crushed his influence. The coalition of rival gangs that had risen up against him gained momentum, driving Omar and his loyalists into hiding. The relentless violence drew increased police attention, leading to multiple arrests and seizures of weapons and drugs. Omar's once feared iron grip was shattered, replaced by a fractured criminal landscape with no clear leader. As the three crime bosses faced their individual collapses, their interconnected networks unraveled as well. The alliances and rivalries that had shaped the British drug trade fractured into smaller, more chaotic factions. The power struggles turned brutal, with violent turf wars becoming the new normal in London, Liverpool, and Birmingham. Communities suffered as violence spilled into the streets, and the once hidden criminal activities became more exposed under law enforcement's intensified crackdown. The collapse was not just a story of defeat, but also a warning. The ambitions and brutal tactics of these narcos had built empires that seemed invincible, but cracks from within and pressure from outside forces brought them down. The law enforcement victories were significant, yet the cycle of violence and crime continued, proving that while empires may fall, the shadows they cast remain long and dangerous. Though Marcus Doyle, Fiona O'Reilly, and Omar Hussein had fallen from power, the story of Britain's drug trade was far from over. The void left by their collapse created a dangerous opportunity for new figures to rise, hungry to claim what was once theirs. These emerging criminals studied the successes and failures of the former bosses, learning from their ambition, cunning, and mistakes. The streets of London, Liverpool, and Birmingham became battlegrounds once again, but this time with new players eager to prove themselves. The drug trade remained deeply embedded in these cities, fueled by demand, poverty, and the endless chase for profit. New gangs adopted different tactics, some more violent, others more discreet, but all shared the same hunger for control. Where Marcus had relied on secrecy, some newcomers favored boldness and public displays of power.